And we are live, I think. What's up, everybody?
Hang on, I don't see it here.
Yep, we're live.
There we go.
Sorry, everybody, for being so late. The 100 Thomas is being used now because the summer course has started. So we need to reserve the room and do a bunch of things.
Indeed. So
How are you?
I am rocking and rolling. Yep. I have been in beast mode thinking about all the issues, different things happening in the world, and unlike the regular semesters when things get going, I don't really have a lot of time to read and keep up with things, and so it takes me a bit. But right now in the summertime, I have a lot of time to really be thinking about a lot of things and writing some new classes and new skits or new activities, and yeah, it's really good. It's quite interesting, actually. Yeah, so it feels really good.
What have you been up to? It's been 2-3 weeks since we've done this last.
Just working, writing proposals. We've been working on these new course proposals for World in Conversation, and they've been really taking an immense amount of time, but we're laying the building blocks for taking the organization to another level, and it's been a lot of work, and really I didn't expect to be as involved as I am this summer. In fact, I'm probably putting in as many hours as I put in during the regular year. So it's been pretty intense, actually.
From somebody who works with you, that's not surprising that you're putting in as many hours now than you are in the school year.
Yeah, I was thinking about this yesterday, that it feels like I just born to work. It's part of being in the working class. You just work until you drop. And so I think it's my destiny. How about you? Same thing, working?
Working. I have I'm working for Wink, half time, and I'm working for a restaurant, and that restaurant's, it's a restaurant. For anybody who has never worked in a restaurant, because I never did, it's something else. It's a whole different ballgame than anything I've ever done in my life.
Everyone should have that experience at some point.
Yeah, I agree.
And and understand what really happens in a restaurant. Places where they cook food that we actually put in our bodies. It's quite humbling, to be honest.
It's funny because one of my favorite shows at the beginning of the summer was Gordon Ramsay's Kitchen Nightmare, and I'd watch these shows and be like, these idiots, why aren't they just making the food? And then actually work at a restaurant, oh, so this is what happens when you have 45 people in a restaurant at one time, and they all send in their orders at the same time.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Dude,
right?
It's something else.
And they want their food quickly.
And it has
fresh.
to be hot. And
yeah, it's amazing, man.
Last week we messed up because we accidentally sent out a main course before an appetizer. And it was like, you never do that.
Oh, my God. The world ends.
Dude, it was bad. We got yelled at for
oh, my gosh,
an hour.
As if it matters. All right, well, listen, man. What do you got for me? What are we thinking through today?
So we have the Iranian sanctions and the war. We have Hong Kong. You have reparations to talk about, the border wall, climate change, and Biden. And I just wanted to start off, really, before we go into those specific topics. I know you didn't watch the debate, but if anybody who's watching this live, if you want to comment and tell us your thoughts about the debate that happened last night, there's another one tonight. It's funny because it's 20 people, so it's 10 on what was last night, Wednesday, and then 10 tonight. And when they started off, they were like, we randomly selected these groups to go in this order, and it was like, okay, well, on Wednesday you had Warren, Julio, O'Rourke, and then one other person who was big, and then on the other night it's the 10 main people who are running. You have Pete Buttigieg on tonight, you have Sanders, you have Biden, you have all the big people tonight. Last night was just Elizabeth Warren, really.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's kind of, it's pretty. It makes me really wonder about how we select people out. I mean, it's cosmic actually, how it happens. Any to really understand all the factors and forces that come into play to lead to the selection of a candidate in the United States. It is, how certain people rise to the top or don't, and it's really quite magical, sociologically speaking. Yeah, for me to watch that and never understand it as much as I could put my time into it. All right, so what should we start with? Maybe I'll start with Iran, because it's kind of one that it's probably in some ways the most unnerving for me right now to watch what's happening, and as best I can. I mean, again, speaking as a generalist, not as someone who. I mean, there are a lot of folks out there who are Iran specialists, Middle East specialists, but Iranian specialists, and I'm not. But I've been kind of thinking about these issues for 30 plus years, and I think what's most unnerving about it is how quickly things could spiral into a war, and how Trump has so many people around him who are hawks and who are really, it seems like, interested in that as an option, and who, whose own children don't appear to be, not sending their own kids off to war. But it doesn't even matter, even if they were. I mean, the fact is, war. Well, first off, I was thinking this morning, actually, with questions of climate change, and so many things are really coming to a head this summer. And I'm not talking about the heat wave in Europe, but really the data that are coming back about the changes in Antarctica, the Greenland ice shelf. I mean, so many different things that it would appear to be, as though we're really in a like, things are just speeding up, right? And I was thinking, wow, wouldn't it be fascinating if all of the energy that we put into war and weapons of war, we could put into the environment, just like bring all the countries together, right? All this talk with Iran and so on, right? And just wherever it is, if we just sat down and said, okay, human beings, here we are, like we might be facing a global crisis, the likes of which, human beings in our present form have never confronted. And let's give some thought to setting aside investing in war and investing in conflict and fueling the military-industrial complex and so on, and let's just fuel the environmental complex. And how easily, to me, from a child's standpoint, right? I mean, how easily we could do that and how we don't do it. And of course, from a sociologist standpoint, it's pretty easy to see why we don't, right? But in any case, I was thinking about Iran and how just these ratcheting up sanctions and ratcheting up the volume on the conflict, right, with Iran. How it's so it's really frightening to a certain extent, because it doesn't have to happen. We all want the same things, and we could easily spiral into a conflict that's caused by people really being unable to or unwilling to sit down and talk. And so while we sit back and I hear people talking about Iran, and I hear commentators, and I'm reading different people who really have no idea what's happening in Iran or what's happening with the treaty that we signed with the Iranians that during the Obama administration, and all that went into that, and all that's really happening, and what's going on behind the scenes, and how the vast majority of people really have no idea. And I don't know the ins and outs behind the scenes, but I know enough to know that I don't know. And that's a little bit unsettling to me. Like you, like, do you, what, I mean, like, you know what I mean about understanding Iran? Like, what would it take for you to understand, to be able to formulate an opinion on it, let's say?
I think the biggest thing, especially that we talk about in class sometimes, is like going there and actually talking to people from the area and asking them what do they think about the conflict. And I mean, Iran has been like the center of these conflicts since what, the 80s, 70s? So like they've always been almost at war, or they've always been helping with proxy wars.
Yeah.
And so it's like it's a place that whenever I think about Iran, it's like, well, it's a place where people are violent. It's dangerous. It's all these things, but I have to go there and actually experience it. But in order for me to understand the conflict, it would be studying the history for the past 50, 60 years, really.
Yeah, and studying the negotiations and studying what's happened in the back channels and how, and then really being willing to see the conflict from the perspective of Iran or the perspective of other players in the Middle East. And, you know, it takes a lot to do that. And I think about how much I have studied it and how many people I've spoken with and how engaged I've been, how many videos I've watched. I mean, so many things, articles and books, and how I feel like I know nothing. And I think, wow, you know, we have a lot of policies that are being made by people who know a lot less than I do, and I know nothing. And so it's really rather unnerving, and it's really rather frightening. And this idea that Iranians are the big enemy. And in fact, Iranians, you know, when you really look at it, you look at it from their perspective, you know, they want the exact same thing. It was really fascinating. A number of years ago, I was in New York at the Iranian consulate in New York. We were trying to start some dialogues. Well, we had started some dialogues in Iran. And so at some point in time, I had we had a conference call with the Iranian desk at the State Department, and there were people in the call. There were about 10 of us, and there were, you know, in 5 different countries, kind of thing, you know. And we all were talking about the World in Conversation dialogue program that we were starting with Iran. Well, we were underway actually, and what they were saying was, you know, we weren't doing that many groups. It wasn't like, you know, our program in Afghanistan or our growing program in Iraq, but we weren't doing that many dialogues. I think we were in Isfahan and in Tehran. And we were at the time the only organization or center in the United States that was actively engaged in dialogue as public diplomacy with Iranian citizens. So you think about that, right? Like nobody else is doing that, and we were doing, I don't know, like 2 dialogues a week at that time. But as a result of that, we set up a meeting with the consulate in New York City, and we spoke with the 2 kind of highest ranking folks at the Iranian consulate who were not able to leave. They could go as far as I think they were stuck within a 25-kilometer radius of New York, right? So, you know, they were thought about inviting them out to Penn State just to talk with students, but in the end we didn't do that. But it was really fascinating being there. They gave us some great pistachios and tea, by the way. That was pretty cool. But it was really interesting being there and just hearing about things from their perspective and being on their turf, right? Because this was, you know, kind of Iranian territory, you know, in the building, so to speak. And just to, and, you know, not be a softie, not that I'm a dove, because, you know, I'm a hawk when I feel like I need to be a hawk, and I'm a dove when I feel like I need to be a dove. I mean, I'm thoughtful about it, right? Just to only be one or the other just makes no sense. But I remember this particular conversation being really fascinating for understanding exactly what it is that people were, just how they saw things, you know. So that was pretty cool. So hopefully, we will keep going. Hey, so...
Well, if you could, like, for people who don't know what's going on, could you describe in, like, 4 sentences or 5 minutes, your choice, what exactly, like, what's happening? Like, can you give us the highlights of why Trump might want us to go into Iran and fight them for some
Yeah.
reason.
Okay, so I'll do that, and then I want to respond to a couple questions that are on the stream. You can read them off to me, but the idea is from before the Ayatollah, before the revolution in Iran. Iran was very westernized, and they were westernized with the help of the United States, and we supported the government strongly, and we helped the government come into power. And the Shah, it was the Shah of Iran at the time, and really supported in many, many ways. But it was actually really rather brutal, and had a police. It was kind of a police state. The Savak, I think, was the name of the police unit, and it just really clamped down. Kind of like Syria, like Libya. Holding the reins of power very, very, very tightly, and receiving a lot of support from the United States militarily and whatnot. But then eventually, as these things happen, because states are fluid, right? You can only sort of hold people down to the degree to which they're willing to be held down, and at some point over time, things just started to fall apart, and for a wide range of reasons. The economy was really struggling, and the violence was kind of got ratcheted out because people started to protest more. And then the revolution came in, and it was a revolution led by the religious protectorate in Iran. And then, this becomes this kind of anti-U.S. thing, right? Because we had supported the Shah for so long, and the Shah was really not supporting. They identify, the many people at the bottom levels of Iran did not find them supporting the Iranian peoples or the best interests of the Iranian state, because our oil companies were operating and making lots and lots of money, and one thing after another, right?
You're telling me the Iranian government became corrupt?
Yeah, believe it or not, right? With our help and with U.S. corporations.
Exactly.
Right? So then from that point in time, Iran becomes an enemy, right? It's just seen as an enemy of the United States. And the catalyst was in the 80s. The students had taken over the embassy and had taken hostages Americans. I forget, they were 55 or something like that.
Was that the beginning of Reagan's presidency?
Yeah, the very beginning of Reagan's presidency. So, so it just becomes our enemy in the Middle East, right? And then you have the Sunni Shia divide, and there's Shia in Iran, and so. But that was never much of a divide in the Middle East. People in the Middle East can talk, but it has only become that way in the past several decades.
And then that's when we more so backed Saudi, and then Saudi and Iran have the different religious affiliations, and so that just
it's sort of like
perpetuated
Catholics and Protestants to Christians. You can see that, and so. So you think about like in Northern Ireland, right? Even though it's never about religion, it's never only about religion, but religion helps to sort of really frame the conflict. So like in Ireland, Northern Ireland aligned with Protestants, aligned with the UK, and then Southern Ireland aligned with nationalist Ireland tendencies, and then being predominantly Catholic. And so it's not a Protestant Catholic conflict, but it is often talked about that way, and that plays a role in it. So similar in the Middle East.
It seemed to be mostly just a cultural difference. Like when I was in Ireland, this is 2009, so 10 years ago, almost 11 years ago. Like I remember when we were in Ireland, we saw this ad, and it was like, go to Northern Ireland. It's just right up north. Yeah. But to me, I was like, well, it's the same place. But then if you understand the culture, and then you went to Northern Ireland not too long ago, and it was funny, you were telling me a story like, well, we were walking down a street, and we had no idea who was Protestant, who was Catholic, but they knew.
Yeah, everybody knows.
Everybody knew.
Yeah, it's really immensely complicated. So similar in the United States, the conflict between Protestants and Catholics or different ethnic groups in the past, here. So anyway, that's the what happens in Iran then, it helps to bolster the military-industrial complex, which is this immensely powerful web of corporations that get rich selling weapons of war, not only in the United States but around the world. And that once that industry emerged, it's really hard to undercut it and take the power out of it. And so Iran plays a really important role in that, because as long as we have these key enemies around the world, we have to keep developing these weapons of war. And then the more you can ratchet it up, the easier it is to pass through Congress or whatever we have to pass through the different avenues, these new weapons. And, these are just powerful industries. So you can't just pull the plug one day and say, hey, you know what, we're going to just stop building these weapons because we're going to actually address, let's say, climate change or whatever it is we want to address, right? So the infant mortality rate, and so that's it's deeply disturbing in a way. But if you don't understand that, you get caught up in the rhetoric and you start thinking, oh, these people are really evil. And, with Iran, of course, it's the building of nuclear weapons, right? And centrifuges in Iran. But, Iran is saying, look, we got to protect ourselves because we're surrounded, just kind of like Israel is surrounded. The Israelis say, hey, we're surrounded by all these enemies. Well, the Iranians are saying the same thing. And so why can't we have access to these things? And, we're going to use nuclear power for peaceful purposes anyway. And if you really step outside of the United States, it's like, who are we to say that you're not going to do that? Like, who are we? But, we don't see it that way, right? That's just not how we operate. And so, all right. So anyway, give me, do you have a couple,
how could Western Asia, like in Syria, be brought back to a functional, sustainable manner?
Man, really difficult. Once again, once we invest our lives, we invest so much of our economies in war and conflict. These are the places where that stuff spirals out of control. And when you couple that, when you invest in these things, you're not investing in the well-being of meeting basic needs of people. And when you're not investing in the well-being of meeting basic needs in people, then you know that there's going to be people who are going to protest and rise up and say, look, this is unacceptable for me. And so, we're seeing that, Syria is a good example of that, right? Where by things have just spiraled by now. And how do you, I saw just, what it would cost to rebuild Mosul in Iraq. I saw an estimate. I know it was done by maybe the UN or something, and they were, the billions of dollars it would cost. It's not that difficult to bomb a place. It's much more difficult to rebuild it. And so, yeah, it's troubling. But if climate change doesn't sort of stop the whole process, and I know I keep going to that, but it'll happen eventually. Everything is going to get rebuilt. I watched this video the other day about with lots of footage of Western Europe right after World War II. And, Germany and France, and just the level of destruction was profound, absolutely profound. And, when I'm in Western Europe, I have no sense of that whatsoever. And that hasn't been that long ago. So, we'll see.
The only place in Europe that I actually saw anything from World War II was where the Battle of the Bulge happened.
Yeah.
And that was because they were like, no, we're keeping these buildings up that have the bullet holes so that people can remember. But for the most part, they just rebuilt. And it is true that it'll only take 4 seconds for you to bomb a place, but it'll take a lifetime for you to rebuild it.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Think about how long it took us to rebuild part of Manhattan after 9/11.
Yeah. Yes, right. So think about that. And
we're a first world country, and we're supposed to be we're supposed to run the world in terms of engineering and all of these things.
We have the resources and investing.
And it took us so long.
Yeah. So it's troubling, actually.
I don't really have another question. However, you talked about protests.
Wait, hang on.
Okay, go ahead.
How about this question from Mogal? Do you see that? From India?
Yeah, my question is God a thought or a substance? Meaning like... Is God an actual being, a thing, or is it just a thought?
You know, people ask this. This is something I don't talk about God, or sometimes I talk about the sociology of religion, but I don't allow myself, or I don't just take the time to talk about it very much, even though I know that students who are sitting in this classroom, it's probably one of the things that's really on their mind more than anything. And I used to more so as a teacher, but I don't anymore. I personally, one of the struggles, I came to this, what I'm about to say, quite a number of years ago, and once I did, it really challenged me. It transformed the way I understand the concept of God, which is that I could only understand God by anthropomorphizing God. Like I really could. When I think about a God, so I've watched a lot of, Star Trek episodes, right, of these beings who are just ether, right, nothing more. They're ether, and they communicate, but they're just a cloud or something, right? And it was really fascinating, and I realized that, well, I anthropomorphize God, so I can only understand a God as a creator, meaning in what's creation. Creation is something that I see, like someone created this bottle, or someone created this pen, or something. Creation is something that happens, right? Where some kind of material substance becomes something else. I only can conceptualize a God as a being who thinks and hears, who's sentient in the way that I am, thinks, hears, feels, talks. God speaks to me. God wants this. God desires something, right? God dislikes. And so once I saw that was a limitation that I had as a human being, I could no longer think of God in the way that anybody thinks of God, or the way that I used to, right? So God as a creator, I don't think of that anymore, right? Because that's a human creation, the idea of creating, right? So God is a thought. So he's asking, like, okay, it's got a thought, it's got a substance. It's like, well, God's nothing that I could ever imagine, right? And so this idea that the stories that we tell that are just such simplified versions of life, whether the religious textbooks, right, where they're telling stories, but they're human stories. They're not God's stories, right? They're human stories. So God is asking people, or imploring people, or desiring people to do all these things. Well, those are human beings talking to themselves, right? That's pretty clear. And from my perspective, right? And so then I said, I can't even imagine what God is, because anything that I imagine, I'm imagining through my own senses, and that's just the limitation. And if God created me, well, God created everything else, including the ether, right? So why would I ever imagine I'm the most evolved, or most advanced, or most whatever, like the ether is, you know what I mean? The cloud is this, and like, I don't know, it's so profound to me. So I don't ever even think about God. It's just not part of, I think about God all the time, but it's just not part of my reality, because it's so beyond anything I could ever imagine. But I'm struck by, I nonetheless find it quite hilarious to, sometimes I listen to preachers or people who, claim to know. I know that people have an experience of deep love, or deep something, like some sense in themselves that profoundly connects them to themselves and to life around them, and attribute that to God. And I think that's amazing, and that's wonderful, right? And I suppose I would do the same thing. It's just that I just don't know what the God is. Although when I look at that little mask over your shoulder right there, I can't help but think, oh my God, I am God, right? Yeah.
Well, it's funny that you talked about like the imagery that we have of God, because like growing up as like a 90s kid with Disney being everywhere, and one of my favorite Disney movies being Hercules, It's funny
Yeah.
now that I look back into how I used to see God.
Yeah.
It was always as the Disney version of who God is.
Well,
And
that's kind of what it is. That's what most people have.
exactly. And so like you think of like heaven as this perfect place, and then in Hercules it's like, oh, they destroyed a column, and then it just is back into it's
Yeah, yeah,
perfect, and it's because of Zeus. And I had the same images, but
Yeah.
as the Christian God and as Jesus, and it's just all it's all
right,
the
right.
images that we have, but like those are all human conceptions. Those are all human thoughts that we have.
Well, they're all human thoughts. So I'm looking at Ohelo Lemali, I think. He says, I studied theology. I would rather ask a theologian from an Orthodox background to explain God instead of a sociologist. And I think, well, I would actually rather ask a sociologist because, so let me speak to you. The problem is, look, here's the other side as the sociologist, right? This is a conundrum that you have to, it's a trap you have to get out of. The vast majority of us are born into we believe, or we're grounded in the religion that we're born into, or the perspective, right? Or at this stage in history, whatever it is, right? We're grounded there. So, if I was born into Christianity, let's say, 1,000 years ago, I would have very different conceptions of God and meaning and all sorts of things, right?
You'd have a different concept of the universe in general.
Of everything. And so I'm born into it right now, so therefore I'm limited by that. My family was Christian. They weren't Muslim, they weren't Buddhist, they weren't atheists, they didn't believe in the Greek gods. They didn't believe in Zeus, for example. They could have believed in Zeus, and why not? That would make just about as much sense. And so, and I don't mean that flippantly. I mean, you could make a good argument that, Zeus is real, or was real, or is the god, and, the grand god. I mean, it doesn't, at least you could make as good of an argument as you could make for the Christian god or the Muslim god, right? So the idea being, and I don't mean that. I mean that sociologically, right? Like if I took somebody who was a firm believer in Zeus and I held them up against somebody who was a firm believer in, Krishna, or the Judeo-Christian God. I mean, you put them in a room and let them like kind of work it out. They're gonna leave the room not having changed each other's minds because they have really good ideas about what they are and what they believe in, right? So once I understood that I was limited by that and that most people are born into a certain way of being, then I think I can no longer believe those things, right? Because I have no reason to believe that. And the problem with anybody who's Orthodox is like, well, you can understand the context within which your particular thought perspective exists. So maybe it's Orthodox Judaism, right? Or Orthodox, Islam or Christianity or Hinduism, right? Or Buddhism, let's say. But you can understand that. But, the goal of the sociologist really is to zoom out and see what they all have in common and what it is that people are actually really saying. And so if I want to understand Judaism, I don't go to a sociologist. I'm going to go to an Orthodox, rabbi and say, tell me what it is that you all are talking about here. But if I want to understand religion, then I want to zoom out and see someone who can make the connections between all of them. And by the way, the what I just pointed out is the conundrum, right? If you're born in, if you believe in the religion you were born into, that's quite a problem, really. It's quite a problem because there's nothing in the universe at all, because you're immediately standing in quicksand, because there's nothing, you cannot argue anything on solid ground, because you didn't come to that for any other reason that you were just born into it. So it's like, okay, it's like me saying Sam is the best name for me because it's the perfect name for me. I'm like, Sam, and I could argue that to my grave, and yet my mother named me after the gynecologist who delivered me, because I was her fifth kid and she hadn't thought of a name, and said, all right, whatever, I'll take your name, right? And completely random, his name could have been William, And she would have said, okay, and my name would be William, but it wasn't, it was Sam. So for me to make that argument would be silly. So for me to make the argument that the religion of my birth is the one true religion and all those beliefs are the ones that I should stick with and everyone should stick with is absurd, really. But I get it, right? It's a lovely perspective to hold my place ethically and morally and socially in the universe, and that's lovely. It's great. So stick to the religion of birth.
I saw one of the comments says, without accountability to someone other than ourselves, we really will wander around spiritually lost. And I've heard that my entire life. I used to say that, like, if there was no religion that was true and we had no accountability to God, then it would be anarchy, it would be crazy. But I don't think that to be true. I think for the most part, regardless of religion, people want the best for each other. And that's one of the things that I love about America is the fact that there's so many people who can believe different things and live together with their own different belief systems.
Well, as much as they do.
As much as they do, but
because there's a lot of conflict. Yeah, I was thinking about this. I'm going to come back to the accountability question, but I was thinking about the United States the other day, and I say this kind of offhandedly, very quickly, but I was thinking about the immense diversity in this land, and understanding the history of all of the negative, the really bad stuff of economic exploitation, and in the form of just class conflict and
gentrification
and genocide of indigenous peoples and slavery and a whole system built upon slavery and deep race-based inequality and so on. But not to take that lightly, all those things, and at the same time, the amount of different cultures and different peoples that come together in this land, and that we have only had one civil war, is profound, actually, honestly, and that Americans get along within the borders as much as we do. Now, mind you, we meddle in other people's business, and we a lot of the wars we probably ought to be fighting here, maybe not ought to be, but we could be fighting. We fight in other lands, but nonetheless, okay. So let me.
The accountability piece.
The accountability, yeah. So here's the thing: you all you have to do is look at people who don't have a religion and who don't believe in anything, who grew up, really have the deepest sense that they came from nothing out of chance, and that they're here just because they're here, and when they die, they will just disappear like I snap my fingers. And you look at the ways in which they live their lives, and in which the kinds of things that they support and believe and do, etc. And you just observe them. I mean, it's the use of scientific method on this, right? So I can sit back and say, well, if I didn't have a belief in some larger purpose and larger meaning, I would just act haphazardly, and if lots of people did that, it would be total chaos. Well, okay, test that out, right? So study the people who don't believe anything and see how they act, and then study the countries where the belief in an afterlife or the belief in some sort of system, some God and some dominant religious or ethical system is or should be prevalent in the world. See how those societies are, and when we do that, we find actually that religion doesn't seem to have much of an impact on people behaving in kinder ways toward other people. So that's an empirical question, and the empirical data thus far are indicating that we really don't need religion to be ethical and moral in our thoughts or in our actions. So, which I find quite fascinating. And then we go to the Scandinavian countries where we see, kind of the level of in the West, just speaking in the West, where the level of religiosity is lowest. Or go to in parts of Asia, go to China, where we see religiosity is immensely low in the way that we think about it in the West. And most people are getting along quite well with one another, right? So, not talking about the Chinese government, that's another story, but, Okay, what else do we have? How would you, I love how you hold the beat.
I saw a question earlier that asked about India and how we view India as Americans.
Yeah,
and it's bad for me as a millennial, as I can speak to our younger viewers. Like, most of what I think about India is when they separated from England, in what 1949 or something
Yeah.
like that. Like that's the last like real like the fact that there's a billion people who live there, the fact that the English ruled them after they got rid of all other colonies, but yet still they were like, oh, like slavery's bad and colonies are bad, but we're still going to have India. And now the fact that India and Pakistan are two different countries, and then some of them believe that they should be the other country.
Yeah.
And so they have conflict there. And the only other thing I can think of is the fact that the largest sporting event is Pakistan versus India for
This just happened, by the way,
for
in
cricket. Yeah.
Yeah. The game, and I think India seemed to really clean their clocks. As
1947. I apologize.
So look, I am struck by how little we think about here in the United States, right? How little we think about India and talk about India, and how little India really comes into the public imagination. I'm really struck by that. China, much more so, right? We have every city has every major city in the United States has a Chinatown, and going back 150 years in some cities, like New York and San Francisco and Chicago and so on. But I'm struck by how little we really think about India. And so a lot of times, people will say, why don't you talk about India more in class? And I probably could, and I probably should. No, I could, and I probably should. But the fact is, it's not part of the public imagination in the United States. So, you have Indian restaurants, and you have, here in this town, we have quite a number of, a couple of Indian stores, right? But in New Jersey, I mean, it's not difficult to find, in New York City and in central Jersey, you can find communities where there are, predominantly Indian communities. But I'm struck by that. And, it's over 1 billion people in India, and how it could be such a small, tiny fraction of the American imagination when, other countries are a huge part of that imagination. So, I will go there. All right.
And for me, like people, if you would tell me in high school, like what continent is India part of, I probably wouldn't have known, because we don't think of it as an Asian country, although it is.
We don't. No, we don't think. We think almost nothing, really. Honestly, it's really, it's striking to me. And so I've been there to India 3 times, but I would say I know nothing about India, really, but certainly even from those trips at all. It's like coming to the United States, and going to New York or going to LA and having a sense that you know something about the United States, and that's the same as.
Or even Haiti. Like I've been to Haiti how many times, and I feel like I don't know. Like I know some of it.
Yeah, it's a tiny country, right?
It's a tiny country, but it has like Port-au-Prince is totally different than Cabaret, and Cabaret is completely different than what's in the middle of the country, like in the middle of the mountains.
Yeah.
And it's vast.
No, it's really quite.
It's vast.
All right.
Do we want to
look at what is that question about cultural lag from? There's another one from Mogala. I know I answered the other one.
As a sociologist, do you think cultural lag is valid in our times? Because most cultures are very lag, I think. Please answer my question. Cultural lag, I would assume, is like different cultures being behind each other.
Explain what you mean by cultural lag, and I'll come back to that.
Yeah.
I think I know what you mean, but someone made a comment about the Chinese. The Chinese are not nice people. That's one of the statements that you can't say. Well, you can say, but I don't say it. I don't say that about anybody, because everywhere I've ever, all the people who I've met, I've never met a single person from a single culture who represented that entire culture who is not a nice person. Let me just say that. And so I can never, because I've traveled so much and outside of the U.S., but also I've met so many people from different lands inside of the U.S. Who are just, immensely different and immensely kind and interesting, and really not very different from one another or anybody else. I can never make a statement like that. I could make all sorts of statements about, the current kind of state of the Chinese China as a state and where things are going, and like the kinds of things that are happening that in my mind, in an ideal world, they wouldn't be happening, that are really quite problematic. But also I couldn't make a statement like that. So I sometimes wish I could, right? I wish I could go back in time when I was less open and my mind was less filled with experience, and I could make certain judgment statements or just really very clear black and white statements about anything. And I feel like something happened to me over the years where I just can't do that. And a lot of times people critique me for being too wishy-washy, and I won't come down really firm, or I can contradict myself 2 or 3 times in one single sentence. And it is because I can't say anything that I can really, there's not much I can say that I could really stand behind.
It's funny because I remember when I worked for my church that I helped start up, the one pastor told me, never be wishy-washy. Always know what you believe, or you're just going to blow like a leaf in the wind. And I was like, yeah, that's really true. Like, I don't want to just be wherever, but now I have to be. Like, the only way for you to actually truly know is to know nothing at all and to experience everything.
And even then, the more you experience,
the less you're going to know.
Less you know, and the more you just get used to kind of blowing like a leaf in the wind, right? Like kind of hanging from a tree and blowing. The more fascinating it is. Sometimes but again, I'm going to say I wish sometimes it wasn't that way with me. I wish that I could just stand really firm. I mean, there's some places I can stand really firm, right? I mean, there's certain human rights questions and so on. But okay, so cultural lag. Culture's taking time to catch up with technological innovations, and so what was the initial question? Cultural lag.
Do you think cultural lag is valid in our time? Because most cultures are very lag, I think.
So culture's taking time to catch up with technology. Yeah, look, here, let me just think about this. I am... oh my gosh, this is such a fascinating question. It's such a fascinating question. I don't even know how to, So listen, Mogal, I'm not avoiding this. I'm trying to figure out how I can dive into it. It's such a cool question. It's something I think about a lot because, you have here, here's what, let me take a step back. Like technology, technology, as we think about it, the way I think about it as a sociologist is that technology is an extension of the human body somehow, right? So if you strip away with everything else, we have the human body, right? So if I want technology to be able to do what my body does. So if I'm a farmer, I want technology. Let's say I have no technology, and so that means I got to dig into the ground with my fingertips. I have to sort of pull the soil away. I got to put seeds in. I got to carry water from a water source. Let's say it doesn't rain. I got to carry water, and so I carry it in my hands because that's all I have, or in my mouth. I need some vessel or container. I carry the water. I put it on the seeds, or I put water in my mouth in the stream, and I spit it out onto the seeds, right? And then I do the next one, and et cetera, right? Or I have the technology that's called a shovel, and maybe it's not a show. Maybe I just take a rock and I use that rock as technology because it's thin and I can like dig the rock in the ground and pull the soil back, and I don't have to use my fingertips, right? And then, or then I can take a half of a coconut and I can put water in and I can bring it over and pour on. So that's technology. This is technology, right? All this microphone stand it's technology. It's just an ability to hold this microphone, because if I didn't have that, I'd have to hold it in my hand. So then we have what lights, right? We have telephones. We have everything else that is technology. It's an extension of the human body in some way, right? And I'm doing that. A crane. I mean, I think about, I gave the example of my hand pulling soil away. Well, a massive crane or a front loader is doing kind of the same thing, right? It's all technology. So countries are lagging in many ways because oftentimes they don't have the resources to they either don't believe that the technology is important, like you can look at a place like Bhutan or something, and the technology doesn't matter, so we're not going to bring television in or music because stereos or that sort of thing, because we don't think that's going to add to the quality of life, so either a belief system or just having the resources to pay for the technology, right? I was reading an article this morning about Afghanistan and schools in Afghanistan and how many schools are still outdoors because they don't even have the resources to build shelter for the schools, and so they don't have computers, and even if they had computers, they don't have generators and to create electricity, and even if they had the generators to create electricity, they don't have enough fuel. And why don't they have fuel? Because they can't get the fuel to the school, and because it's costly, and it's one thing after another. And so most societies, if they could, they would choose to not lag behind, because they would appropriate, or at least they utilize that technology to move ahead, but they can't. And I'm not saying that's a good thing, but that's what happens a lot. And of course, we see, you and I have seen that a great deal in Haiti, and people find ways to get around it. And so cultural lag is quite problematic. And then look, here's one. Look at the Chinese and facial recognition software, right? And look at the degree to which China is in the UK, but China's now way out front, it seems like, of the UK in facial recognition. And they're talk about cultural lag, the rest of the world is lagging behind. And there's a point at which, when is China going to get to the point where they can recognize the face of every single person in China? I mean, obviously it's a ways off, but maybe it's not that far off. It's like, holy smokes, there's a new 1984-ish kind of technology. And is that going to be is that a bad thing or a good thing? I don't know. Will it be bad or good?
It's bad.
Well,
I think
I'm going to say it's bad, but maybe, again, that's the West, right? Like that, I don't know. Like, look, I make this argument a lot that probably some of the decisions that the Chinese government is making right now, and things like facial recognition and all sorts of stuff, some of those decisions are probably going to be one of the main reasons. No, probably will be, yes, the main reasons that China is running the world in 60 years or 70 years, right? And they probably will be, because they're willing to do certain things now that we in the West are not willing to do because of our emphasis on individual rights in the way that we have. But China is going to move forward, and this is what happens. This is all, like, some countries rise up and others fall down, sometimes for the best, right? And I mean, it seems like for the best. Like, it seems like, hey, our system is the best at this point in time. But it may not be the best system to carry humanity into the future 100 years from now. And what we're going to need is another system in which there's far more control over human beings. And I say need, I mean, I'm speaking as a sociologist. I'm not speaking of what is desirable or what is best for those human beings, but I'm just saying that life itself may call forth a system that is immensely more sort of anti-individualistic or anti-individual rights or totalitarian, let's say, than right now most people in the West would say is ideal or good. So that's the trying to see the world in a non-judgmental way, just see it in its purest sociological incarnation.
And that's hard for like me, because I'm very much for individual freedoms and accountability and things, and I know you are as well, as like a libertarian of sorts. And it does make me worry about like 1984 style stuff coming true, especially with China, and if they have their influence in the United States, because they will. Like, they're going to, and it's not like we're not living in the same kind of constructed world by our government, because ever since 9/11 we've had the Patriot Act, so it's now legal for the United States government to tap into any person's phone without a warrant, which is insane for us to live in the West. And it's just going to perpetually continue. And technology, I think mostly every revolution that's happened, industrial, the technological revolution's happening now, there's always going to be pushback and there's always going to be lag behind it, but eventually everyone will get caught up.
Okay.
Or most people will get caught up, not everybody.
Let me respond to the issue with 9/11 and the Patriot Act is this is small potatoes compared to what the Chinese government is managing to do and preparing to do and managing and beginning to do. So I mean, and partly it's because we're just busy monitoring the behavior of people in other countries, right? But still, I would call it small potatoes. But nonetheless. Okay, so I don't think it's I'm not speaking from a Machiavellian perspective at all. And I'm not saying that it's ideal it's like sort of a chess game to the end, right? It's not about that. I think that if we look at questions of I'm going to go back to the environment. Clearly, humanity itself, human beings are putting a strain on the environment, unlike we've seen, right? I mean, if we pull our heads out of our, just put our attention for a hot minute toward what the data that are coming back these days, plastics in the oceans and, just pollution and all of the kind of factors and forces that are going to lead to sea level rise and climate refugees and one thing after another, right? Soil erosion and water issues. Look at Chennai right now. City of 5 million people are literally out of water, right, in southern India. Like, how do you start to manage those kinds of things, right? So they will be 5 million climate refugees. When you have no water, you go somewhere. So we're seeing this more and more around the world, right? So how do we respond as human beings? We have to reorganize ourselves, and we got to reorganize ourselves really, really fast. And who's going to be best capable of doing that? Well, the people best capable are the ones that sort of call in martial law, which is what happens, right? Which is ultimately what will happen. It would happen here in the United States. The government just declares martial law, shuts down, just curtails individual rights, corporate rights, rights of any rights that allow human beings to assemble and say and do certain things. I mean, you just do that because you have to, because the reality on the ground dictates that. And so the countries that are going to really thrive, the places that will thrive, will be the places where the governments, meaning the bodies that have come together to allow certain collectivities of people to work and interact together over time and space. Those governments, the countries that survive, are the ones in which the governments can act very quickly and act in ways that go against the wills and desires of the individuals in those particular nations, right, those particular places. And so what happens is sometimes it doesn't matter what individuals want or what they think. You just got to act and you make it happen, right? It's sort of like things that I do in this classroom that I'm like, look, I know you would rather like to have X, Y, or Z, but I kind of understand how these things work, and I'm going to make it happen this way or that way, right? So, or anything, right? So many things that happen that we don't understand, and we think, oh, well, this is really stupid. Like, they're rebuilding a road in my town, and they did this, that, and the other thing, and you think, oh, well, that was really dumb. Well, you have no idea that it's actually not really dumb. It's the best possible way to do it. You just don't really understand. So in any case, with these really grave changes that are starting to take place in the environment, we're going to have to act in ways that go against the rights of individual people. And the governments that are best placed and best able to do that are probably going to be the ones that do really well. And the places where, this is just me thinking, right? And the places where people are busy arguing with each other, or battling each other out about these little tiny things over here, like individual rights, the right of me to do X, Y, or Z, the right of me to water my lawn, let's say, those places aren't going to thrive because they're going to be so busy just battling it out with one another that, in the meantime, the whole sort of system has collapsed. Because we, just like right now with you just think about climate change, right? Like, first off, I'm just talking about climate change as a real reality, because it is a reality. Like, it's absurd to even imagine that it's not, right? And it doesn't matter if human beings are responsible. Even if human beings are not responsible, it's happening. And so therefore, what we want to do is stop sort of talking about it and start thinking 5, 10, 20, 40 years down the road, and what do we got to do right now to address what's really coming at us? And we're not doing that because we're busy in this kind of pseudo-democratic system where we're pretending like individuals have a say in things like the elections, right? And we're pretending that really matters instead of looking at what's really going on. And so anyway, that's a thought. So it seems to me that China, as much as I can critique many things about the Chinese government and what they're doing with the Muslim minority and all sorts of things, they seem to kind of are saying, listen, we're going through, we're going to make certain decisions. So,
speaking of China, I think it should be time for us to switch to our second topic, which is Hong Kong and China and their...
Well, wait, hang on. Let me just go back. Read what Hamza just wrote.
Sometimes democracy doesn't work. Our countries are not made for it. Like in Egypt, first people were against dictatorships, and later they were for it.
Yeah. Sometimes, look, so democracy. I mean, I say this a lot. Democracy, it doesn't exist. It's just something you strive for, right? It's like democracy is power in the hands of people, and so you never have full power in the hands of people, and you never have no power in the hands of people. So. But sometimes it seems to me that the best solution to a particular problem is for less power in the hands of people than more. And that's just sociology. This is watching the world play itself out. So,
you said less power for the people?
Yeah, meaning that someone comes in and just says, hey, I'm in control of this situation. I got it, right? Like, you have umpires at a baseball game, right? It's like, well, whatever. Who needs umpires? Just kind of maybe we'll just have one and we'll work it out, like in soccer, you know what I mean? Or football. But no, sometimes you need someone to come in and just sort of say, no, I'm in control here. I got this. Like, here's what we're going to do. Which is how most human beings are, right? If you're sitting around with a group of people, let's say there's 20 people, and you're trying to decide, hey, what restaurant are we going to go to tonight? You know that nothing's going to happen. An hour could go by and nothing will happen until one person stands up and says, listen, this is insane. I got this. Here's where we're going. I already took care of it. And everyone will say, oh, okay, great. Otherwise, they could just sit and starve to death. You know what I mean? I mean, that's a sociological process. So now take that to the level of a nation of 300 30 plus million people like the United States. Yeah, so
Crazy.
all right, so what do we got?
Hong Kong. What's happening in Hong Kong?
Hong Kong.
I mean, they just had, 2 million people in their streets protesting last week or 2 weeks ago?
It's actually not. It's actually a really fascinating. It's pretty easy to understand what's going on there. I think someone asked this in the last live stream, and I didn't really respond. And it's actually not difficult to understand. Let me see if I feel like digging into it. I mean, no, I'm saying it's easy to understand. That doesn't mean I understand it. It's hard being a generalist, really. It's hard to really feel like that, which happens in Social 19, where I have to weigh in on so many things, and everything I weigh in on, everything that I talk about, I know that there are specialists in that area, and that if the specialists were listening to what it is that I'm saying, they would laugh at me, right? So my job is to take somewhat complex things and try to simplify them enough to maybe encourage someone to go out to understand enough of sort of the larger framework of the issue, and then move out and talk about it or study about it, more. So, Hong Kong is was a colony of the Brits, of the British, right? And what they were doing with the colony, and in that part of the world, what was the U.S. doing with the colony and on the other side of the planet? I mean, that's kind of how it operates. And then it was finally 20 years ago. So I mean, the negotiations went on for a long time, and was finally returned to China, but not returned to China fully. So it's one country, but it's two systems, right? So you have still the kind of the British system that is in place, with emphasis more on individual rights and more of a kind of a Western orientation, and then the Chinese system, this slowly linked up with China, right? So the is it the president of Hong Kong? I'm not really sure what we say, if it's president but is still appointed by the Chinese government, and not elected or anything in that way. So
so they're their own country, however, their leader is decided by another country. That co-owns them.
Appointed by the Chinese.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Okay, so all right. So here's a thought. What happened was, about a year ago, there was these two people from Hong Kong, a young man and a young woman, and they took a trip to Taiwan. And they were a couple. They weren't married, but they were together. And he murdered her in Taiwan, the young man, and he came back by himself. Well, eventually, when she didn't return, her family was, concerned and sort of raised the alarm, and the Hong Kong government reached out to the Taiwanese police, and they searched for her. They sort of tracked where they went, and they searched for her, and they found her body. So he murdered her, right? And it seemed pretty clear that, or at least it looked like he murdered her, and so he should maybe stand trial, right? Well, the problem is he can't stand trial in Hong Kong. He's got to stand trial in Taiwan, and there was no extradition treaty between Hong Kong and Taiwan, as there isn't. But lots of countries, not every country has a treaty, right? So meaning that there are places where you can go that does not have a certain relationship, as you can imagine, the United States and Iran, right? So if you committed a crime in the United States and you wanted to hide away, maybe it would be Iran. I don't know if the Iranian government what they would say about that, but I'm assuming there is no extradition treaty between the U.S. and Iran, right? So meaning that we can't just call them on the phone and say, hey, you've got this guy Jeff over there. He's wanted for selling heroin in the United States, and we want you to send them back to us, and they put you on a plane and they send it back.
Right. The U.S. has that with Canada and such.
Lots of places.
Right.
And many countries have it with many other countries, but it turns out that Hong Kong didn't have that. So then they say, the government says, okay, well, what are we going to do, right? Because this family wants justice, right? And so they say, well, they put this law out, and they start moving this law through the legislature that says we're going to establish an extradition treaty with Taiwan, but not only Taiwan, it's going to include other countries, and in one of those countries will be China, right, mainland China. And so once people start looking, and so this is a good thing, right? So that means like, hey, we're going to send this guy back to Taiwan. They're going to have a trial, and maybe he's innocent, but it doesn't look like it, and then justice will be served, right? Which is what this woman's family wants, and lots of activists want in Hong Kong. But what it also means is that if we pass this through, then lots of other things are going to happen. And the big concern by activists in Hong Kong and by people in Hong Kong is actually means that the Chinese government will have access to people that they have deemed to be criminals according to the Chinese system. So let's say some examples would be that you are writing a book against the Chinese government, or you have a podcast and you're speaking out illegally against the Chinese government, and you flee to Hong Kong. Maybe people in Hong Kong think that, hey, you should be able to have this podcast and you should be able to say anything you want on the podcast. And what you said about the Chinese government wasn't such a big deal anyway. I mean, come on, you hardly said anything. But the Chinese government deems you a criminal and decides, hey, we're coming after you. And then we are charging you with a certain number of crimes. And with this new policy in place, this new extradition policy in place, then the Hong Kong government would be required to send you back to China, right? Or because maybe you were, any number of, you published a magazine or you have a website, right? And say, no, this guy, Jeff, is a criminal here, and so we got to send you back. And so a lot of the people that have this idea that we don't support the kinds of laws that are on the books in China that strip away individual rights of certain people who we don't consider to be criminals, right? We don't support that. And so therefore we don't support this law in Hong Kong. And it's a pretty big deal because there are a lot of people who just do not trust the Chinese government as it stands. Well, 1 million, 2 million people come out, right? I mean, this is really huge. And so that's what these protests are. It's not about, Taiwan. It's not the concern of Taiwan. I mean, they're not concerned about the Taiwanese government. They're really concerned about China. So that's what it's all about. I mean, that's the essence of it, right? Is the concern. So
I was just online looking at the bridge that they have in Hong Kong.
Yeah,
it goes to China,
yeah,
like a couple other places.
Yeah.
And in order for you just to travel that, and people want to have they want China to change their rules about it, you have to have 3 insurance companies to sponsor you. You have to pay 3 different tolls in 3 different currencies. They have a lot that they have to work out because they're owned by 2 different governments.
Yeah, and
they're not listening to each other right now.
Well, life is complex, and this is the thing when I hear from people, or I read things where people boil the world down into, as I used to do, till I really started to open my eyes. I used to think, oh, this stuff's really simple, do X, Y, or Z, or that's really dumb, or that's really, but in fact, these things are really complex, and nothing is ever purely positive or purely negative, right? There's always something that comes out of it, right? And so, okay, hang on. Nothing is ever purely positive or negative. Okay, I think we could argue that there are some things, right? I mean, from my I have a certain moral framework. So someone mentioned, Ogelo mentioned Tiananmen Square, right? So I say, okay, so hang on. Nothing's ever positive or negative. All right, well, what about Tiananmen Square? That means nothing's ever purely negative, purely positive. Okay, so what about that? So what's positive in Tiananmen Square, right? So really, and I'm like, okay, well, let me not the death of so many people, right? The slaughter, right? All the lives that were really ruined. But then I look at what the economy of China just in the past 30 years, right? Like what has happened in China with the system, not just the economy, but the political economy. And I think, wow, so much of what we're seeing is because the government in China. Look, this is one way you could look at it. You could make this argument. It's not very difficult to make. Was because the government in China stepped in with such a heavy fist in that way, it actually paved the way to lots of other things happening in the world stage that never would have happened. And so much of the Chinese economy, so many lives in China, like the boats rising, right? So many boats have risen. Look here, look at Penn State. Look at all the Chinese students we have studying at Penn State, right? Yeah, oh my gosh. So much of that is happening because of actions that were taken that really, it's hard to see anything positive about them, right? Because of the horror that was behind them. But okay, but there it is, positive and negative, right? Like if you look far enough at certain things and you look deep enough, you see just this complexity, this web of complexity, that it's really difficult to be a thinker who's bringing wisdom into a situation to make a clear black and white statement, because there's always another way to look at it. So, yeah.
China, man.
No, it's fascinating.
It is.
And it's not, hello, just saying this thing, it's a state-ordered market, not a free market. It's definitely, there's freedom in the market for sure, because you could not grow. Look, all markets are free at some level, right? Even in the Soviet Union. I mean, this is like democracy, right? It's like, there's always in every system, there's a certain level of democracy. North Korea, it doesn't matter. Like, you cannot control every aspect of human behavior. So it's like human beings are going to make decisions on their own. Like, so start right there, right? And then groups of individuals are going to make decisions on their own. So go there. I mean, that's just the nature, right? And so same with markets. People are going to buy and sell and exchange. Like the Soviet Union, I studied the market of the Soviet Union for a number of years when I was in grad school. And there's a lot of freedom happening in the black market, right? So it's like the state-controlled market creates a black market, and within the black market, it's lots of freedom to exchange and sell, and lots of things are happening. So it's like, well, there's another free market, right? So it's all relative, right? This is the thing. It's like nothing's black and white, but it's clearly not as free. The Chinese government or market is not as free as other markets. That's for sure. There's no question about that. Okay, man. What else do we have?
I just keep thinking
back to... Hey, is it just 3 of us on here, by the way?
What's that?
How many of us are on here?
12.
All right, that's cool. I like that. Well, this is what I like, that there's not a lot of people on the actual live portion of the stream, because it allows me then to actually... It's a more interesting conversation on the chat and really sort of follow it, and then I feel a certain amount of freedom to talk about things in a way.
Well, it's crazy because we're talking about China and... just how they're going to lead us potentially into the future. Their government is going to take the steps that you said earlier to bring everyone's ideas hopefully together, and then have one central thought and then move forward.
Yeah.
Regardless of the individuals. And it's crazy because at some points I'm like, yeah, I can see that, but then at other points I can't. Like when we're talking about like just Hong Kong, their protests are because they don't want China's really...
Well, they're afraid, they're concerned about the implications of that law. I mean, to say it, fairly well. Some people are just completely they incensed by it, but in a way that is intellectually fair. people are concerned about the implications of that law. And, you know, it's certainly not prepared to be underneath the umbrella of the Chinese bureaucracy, legal and political and economic bureaucracy and system at this point in time. They're just not ready for that. And it was like, I think it was supposed to be a 50-year process, so they're like kind of 20 years into it. So they have a ways to go, but the full handover. But but you know, by then, who knows what'll happen, right?
And then the other thing you said was about the black markets appearing in the Soviet Union and how those were free markets, but they could go to jail for those.
Yeah,
just like in the United States. So it's not truly
free. The drug market
free.
is in here, in so many places. The marijuana market is, on one hand, it's free, right? I mean, it's illegal, but you know, people are buying and selling. You know. I mean, it's
relative. Never truly free.
No, that's right.
It's free
that's
within
right.
restrictions of the law.
Well, that's even the so-called free market, right? Nothing is free, right? Because all buying and selling is constrained by something, right? I mean, unless we come up with a whole new marketplace, you know, maybe work using Bitcoin or something. But everything is constrained in one way or another, right? So nothing is purely free, and that this is what I think is really important, because I never use the word democracy and like democratic system. I use, you know, like it's like right now we have a U.S. democratic system in the early 21st century, right? But the U.S. the early 21st century version of democracy in the United States, like that's right here. So I'm very careful about making those statements like that, because it's Are we?
I don't think we're getting kicked out. I think people just keep opening these doors.
All right. Okay. What else do we have?
By the way, cryptocurrencies. Great idea. Awful in actuality.
Well,
it's funny because Bitcoin. With me watching so many YouTube videos and YouTubers, and they're like, oh, you need to invest in Bitcoin and then forget about it. And then in 25, 30 years, you're going to have $4 billion in it. And that was probably true for the first 6 months, first year and a half of Bitcoin. But I can't trust Bitcoin. However, I also can't really trust the U.S. dollar, because the U.S. dollar is it's not backed up by anything except for the word of our government, which is backed up by the Chinese government.
Okay, but listen, that's true of everything, right? So
I mean, it is true with everything. However, with something like gold or silver, we're actually able to look at the value.
But even that's just because we agree on that. And so in the end, everything is just about agreement. So that I can say, hey, this pen, I'll sell you 12 of these pens for, $3, right? It's like there's a certain agreement that, okay, the pen will have value and the $3 will have value and so on, right? So there are lots and lots of agreements that we make with one another, and that nothing in the end holds up over time. Just like this pen won't hold up over time. So, so it's probably, but we're going to continue to see new forms of currency that are emerging. Just like, I send money back and forth on Venmo. That's not a new form of currency, but it's a way of sending money back and forth, and how much money gets sent around that never gets transferred to banks, right? Like it took me 2 years to transfer any of my Venmo money to a bank to realize, hey, wait a minute. Instead of being just a number on my phone, it's actually something more than that. I can convert it into something more than that, right? And then once it goes into my bank, it means nothing. It's just a number there, and then I got to convert it into something else. And it only holds up as long as we all agree that the dollar has a certain value, and that gold has a certain value, or that whatever it is. It's utterly fascinating, really, how much we're walking around in this world on a shared agreement about what is true and what is not true, and what is real and what is unreal. And so I'll be anxious to see what the second, or now maybe third generation of cryptocurrency actually brings to us. Because when that happens, when the third generation goes, that's probably the time, because it's a third, right? I think we're really in the second generation now. So the third one it's not going to happen right away, but when it does, that's where you want to invest.
I just don't know
My humble
who.
opinion.
I just don't know who you would invest in, because at first it was Bitcoin. Everybody knew Bitcoin, and then the second generation, there's like 150 different different forms that you can get.
Yeah, but eventually someone's going to come forward. It's going to be like Amazon, right? So how many Amazons were there before we have Amazon, and now Amazon? This is it.
Yeah,
So-
but the Amazon was able to buy and sell goods, and this is just buying and selling
No,
money.
but it doesn't matter, because once it's big enough and there's enough of a shared agreement, then it's like it's like the banks, right? Too big to fail, and too big to fail because if they fail, if we allow like Lehman Brothers to fail, whatever it is, right? If we allow them to fail, trust in the system is what just decides that the system's going down. It's not. It's never. The 2008 crisis. It was really about trust, and so you just gotta. That's what you're really. The whole system is based on that, and so so if we allow these to fail and the trust falls apart, this is like really a problem. I mean that's one way to look at it. I mean there are lots of ways to look at it. So I don't but that's the sociological way that I like to think about this stuff, and it's like, oh my God, the whole system is just based on a certain, like gravity, right? Like everything. I just keep believing that if I step down, the gravity will pull me down. And anyway, that's pretty cool.
We have a morality question.
Okay, go ahead, man. What's the morality question?
How do you see morality? If a woman sells her voice for money, it is socially acceptable in most societies. But if a woman sells her body for money, most of us don't accept them as the same as singers. So he's asking, what is your take on morality?
Morality is a social construction, is all it is.
Yeah.
And so, it's not true in every society, and it's not true through all of human history. But certainly, we got to the place where we started to interpret sex from kind of a unique social lens. But that has not been true for Homo sapiens
throughout most of the time.
For vast majority of what would be, human history. Didn't see it that way. And so, just like, homosexuality is common through all of human history. I mean, it's everywhere, right? It was very common in parts of human history. Of course.
Even going back into just Roman times.
Yeah, not even going back that far, but of course it is. And so this idea that the fact that we, if you say the Judeo-Christian, right, look at the Bible, you just look at this, like, well, why is it mandated that you don't do that? You don't do it because it's happening, right? You know what I mean? And but we know that's just very common. So at some point in time, sex becomes seen as this thing that's really deeply troubling, right? And I don't want to go into it. I've read enough to know that it's really a fascinating story how sex became a problem in the West for us to wrestle with. I've read enough to know that it's a cool story, but I don't remember enough that I could go off on it for a half hour. But so then you say, okay, so therefore, what's wrong if a woman can sell her voice, or a man, doesn't matter, woman or a man, but not sell their body in a sexual way, right? What's the problem with that? Like, well, it's not a problem. It's just that we've decided it's a problem. There's nothing wrong with it. And so two human beings, it's kind of like, it's like a sexual assault. It's like this woman who's claiming right now that Trump sexually assaulted her 20 years. It was only about 20 years ago, right? And which is what's fascinating about that she was in her early 50s when that happened. And so, but she's right now saying, well, I never saw it as rape. And people are, really kind of thrown off by that, because, well, if that's not rape, what is rape? And she's like, I don't know. I never saw it as rape, right? So, and I still don't see it as rape. Like, I see it differently. She has decided in her mind I'm not saying it happened, right? Although, yeah, I'm talking about what she's saying, right? So she's making that distinction. And so we could all make that distinction. So what's the problem with prostitution? Like, who cares? It doesn't matter. We've just decided it's a problem. Yeah, it's what's so utterly fascinating about being a sociologist.
You know what I think is funny?
Go ahead.
When people have moral issues with something, but then they do the same thing that they have a moral issue with.
Well, yeah, we have moral issues with things that we're struggling with in our own lives, right? Like, so that's, otherwise I wouldn't. I mean, it's so common as to be laughable that the people who are yelling about things the most are oftentimes yelling because they've had an experience that's sort of really detrimental in their lives, right? So it's like, oh God. So they're just kind of, the pain is just kind of coming up, or B, it's a part of their being, part of their soul that's trying to express itself, right? Which is why you never trust anybody who's really, really, really homophobic, let's say, right? I just never trust it. It's like when I hear someone just screaming about homosexuality, it's just like it's like the lenses come on and I just see them and I think, oh my God, of course.
What are they going
have
through?
To be gay. Right? What are you screaming about? Like, it's like if I just start, screaming about the fact that this microphone is round and not square, like, oh my God, it matters nothing, right? But what's going on with square microphones that this guy, so yeah, it's crazy to see that, and it's clearly not always the case, but it's so
not,
common.
It isn't all the case, but it's way too common. God, yeah. Whoever is like trying to be the moral hierarchy, trying to say what is right and wrong, those are usually the people that are the ones that break it. And I think that's why when we talked about in this past, I think it was in the fall or spring, you talked about how people who have like these hierarchies are usually the ones that fall, and it's because they're going through so much, and it's easy to see them as perfect, and then when they do mess up, it's even worse.
Hey, can you look at this? Ojelo's comment, I think, is a really interesting one. The one, here's a thought: if a liberal feminist woman does not think it's rape by the age of 50, it wasn't rape. Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, right? This is what's so deeply disturbing to so many people about this, is here's a woman who's really smart, very thoughtful, mature, has an understanding of these things, and is saying, look, I have chosen and I continue to choose to see this act in this particular way, right? The rest of us can all say, well, hang on a minute, like 99 out of 100 of us would say if we saw a video of that act, we would define it as A, right? And yet one of us would say, no, it's not A, it's B. And she's coming along and saying, well, I've described the act that 99 out of 100 of you would call A, but I'm going to call it B anyway. And she's not mentally ill. She's not a psychopath. She's not, you know what I mean? She's not. So for her, that's what it is. But that doesn't mean that the other 99 of us who've all agreed that if we actually witnessed it or saw a video of it, we still are going to call it A. That doesn't mean we're wrong either. It just means that she's not wrong either. You know what I mean? It's so you can't say this is the social construct stuff, right? There's so much. Yeah, man, it's fascinating.
Do you know who Brock Turner is?
Yeah.
Yeah? Just curious.
Yeah. So it really is I think what's deeply disturbing for me about that maybe it's this particular situation with this woman who's accusing Trump, but it happens lots of times in lots of situations, I think, is when people insist that other people see a situation or a phenomenon in the way that they do, and make the claim that, well, the rest of us, or most of us, all see it this way, so therefore you should see it this way too. And it's troubling to me, right? Because as someone who swims upstream very often, right, that I'm just unwilling to just see it the way everybody else sees it because they tell me to, right? And the fact that here's this woman who is saying, no, I had this experience with this man, and I'm going to see it my own way. And I think it throws people off tremendously, because it means their whole world, they're walking on thin ice at some level. It's like, wait a minute, if she can see it like this, then does that mean and she's, by all accounts, I mean, it sounds like she's a very thoughtful, reasonable person, then who am I to see it this other way, right? Because I can't make the proclamation that she's crazy, and so therefore maybe there's something wrong with me. And I think that's what's so unnerving in situations like this, because and it certainly is for me, it's what's unnerving, and when I'm in these kinds of situations, that it calls into question everything that I think and that I know about the world. And you know, I guess the goal when you get to a certain age, like my age, is to say, well, let me just do the best I can, you know, and not insist that the rest of the people see the world like I do.
There's just a comment that said if she had experienced it at all, and I want to bring up what we talked about last semester, was like, if somebody is accusing somebody of it, the statistics are that they're probably telling the truth.
Well, so according to, just in the United States, according to FBI data, right? I mean, you know, according to data of people who are studying wrongful accusations and wrongful convictions and so on, right? The numbers are really, really low about what we really know, the best science we can apply to this. Thoughtful people who are 100% objective and really, really smart and trying to address this question, right? And who've been studying it for years and years and years and years. The numbers of people, what their conclusions are, that the number of people who falsely accuse other people of crimes, including, you know, whatever the crime is, but including sexual assault or rape, are very, very low. So the false accusations are low. It's not 50-50 by any stretch. It's like, you know, 3 or 4% or something is it's really, really low. And so, and it's true for all crimes, right? So therefore, when we say, well, if it really happened, the moment you say if it really happened, now it's bifurcated, right? So it's like it happened or it didn't happen. That's 50-50. But the folks studying this are saying that, well, it's actually not 50-50. So let's say it's 97-3 is the way you would need to look at that. And so that's and I'm not saying that it did happen, right? But again, like I'm not weighing in on that. That's not my. Although, you know, when you have, in her particular case, you know, she had 2 friends that she went to right away. She called one immediately that very evening and said, oh my God, this happened. So you have these 2 friends, right? They both have now, they didn't want to come out and speak about it, but they did as of yesterday, right? And the one advised her, do nothing, say nothing, because, you know, he has too much power to just ruin your life. Just say nothing. Just forget about it. And the other one said, go to the police. So you have these 2 friends. They both reacted differently. They're both very clear about the fact that they reacted in these ways, and this is what they said. And yes, we talked about it. You know, I don't know, the one was that evening. The other one may have been that evening as well. But also very smart, thoughtful people, right? And so it strikes me as, and they both remember the story as she told it. It strikes me as highly unlikely, just in me as a thoughtful, I like to think that I'm fairly thoughtful, and I have to figure out certain, you know, I mean, I got to figure out, I look at my weather app and and I got it, and it says, you know, there's a 30% chance of rain, and I look at the sky and I say, well, does it look like it's going to rain? Well, I've had, you know, 58 years of trying to figure this stuff out, right? I think I'm pretty thoughtful about it. I know how to read a weather map. I know lots of things. So, okay. So as someone who's thoughtful about that, I'm also thoughtful about this other. When people say, hey, somebody committed this crime, somebody did something to me, and then here's what it is. It's this, and I start putting all the pieces together. I think the truth pendulum is swinging in on the side of her telling some version of the truth, not, you know, our president who says she's not my type. I mean, that, you know, yeah, I don't know. But I generally don't weigh in on it. But, you know, like if I knew nothing about the weather and I just decided, is it going to rain today? And I just throw a feather up in the air, and if it drops one way or another way, I say yes or no. I mean, that's kind of what it is, right? And that's what a lot of people are basing knowledge of. So people are going to decide, oh, is this woman telling the truth? Well, they're going to base their knowledge on about as much data as they would if they decide if it's going to rain by flipping a coin, and heads it will and tails it won't. I mean, really, that's about the same amount of thought, same level of thought. So I hope did that make sense, bro?
I think so.
Yeah.
I'm just reading through some of these comments, and it's like, there's like this question about what is, like, when we boil all of this stuff down, like all of like these allegations and what is moral and what isn't moral and all of these things, I think the number one thing, like, people are asking, like, well, what about pedophilia? Like, the statement is you have to have consent between two people.
Well, no, hang on. Let me look at pedophilia. Look, here's the thing. I live as a, I don't live in this world of cultural relativism, right? Where it's like, well, it's all relative to a certain culture. So, you know, female genital mutilation. Well, okay, I'm against that, but if I lived in that culture, and then it would be fine because that's what their culture believes, and it's all good. No, there are some things.
Well, I mean, that's the same exact thing as what happens in the United States. The United States is one of the only countries in the world that isn't a Jewish major population, but still has male genital mutilation, but we don't call it that because we call it circumcision because it's normal.
My genitalia were mutilated when I was an infant. Okay, so here is or I listened to this story this morning about a man in Texas who's on death row and basically spends 23 hours a day in solitary confinement. You know, he murdered two people. He was found guilty of murdering two people, and he was his conviction is being reviewed. I mean, this was a number of years ago, but he spends 23 hours a day in solitary confinement. I mean, like, you could make an argument that that is absolutely inhumane and so on and so forth, but we would say, well, but you know, but that's Texas and that's the United States and it's relative, and we do that here. But in other countries would say that is just unbelievably inhumane. It doesn't matter if he murdered 2 or 200 people. Like, you can't do that. So anyway, I don't live in a world of cultural relativism whereby I just flippantly say, well, you got to be in that culture and like then you'll understand it and that's fine and that's the way it. No, I don't. I wrestle with these things day in and day out and day in and day out. But I am a sociologist, and here's what I know. There are cultures through time in which, for example, pedophilia was fine, including here in the United States, where, you know, for most of U.S. history, children as young as 14 could get married, and here, you know, like young girls as young as 12, 13, and 14 could be married to men as old as 30 and 40, and that was perfectly fine and legal and not a problem, right? But there are many cultures in the United States where it is some kind of pedophilia. We're not talking infants, but we're talking children, right? And there were children learn sexuality from adults, and it's just seen as it's part of the culture, and it's the way it is, and it's not seen as shameful and seen as a problem, and then it's just part of the way of being, and nobody grows up feeling a certain kind of shame about it, okay? Because you don't learn the shame. You don't learn that. It's not saying that it's right or it's good, it's best, or whatever the case is, right? But it is saying that we know that human beings are socialized to accept and reject certain things, and doesn't make them right, but it makes them, but when we accept certain things, and because we've been socialized that way, we don't interpret it as inherently a problem. We're not inherently scarred by it. So these things are really, you don't. We in our culture have decided that there's a certain age limit for sex between people when they've gone over the age limit and under the age limit. Like there's a certain, you just don't do that. And then suddenly it just changes, our interpretation of it. Oh my God. I had sex with when I was 17, and I had sex with a woman who was 18, and suddenly right now, and then I interpret it in a certain way, and I feel some kind of way about it, right? It's like, okay, well,
some of those things are up to common sense, but like what the main thing is, they're always, people are, especially in these comments, some people are trying to like put the LGBT community movement and pedophilia movement together. And what I want to say is, if even without looking at the historical differences of cults and different organizations and ways in which people have allowed pedophilia to happen, especially in the United States throughout the past 200 years, but there's a push in our culture that I think is good, that it has to be two consenting people who know what they're actually getting into and what they're doing. And that leads to other problems, because maybe this woman, just going back to the Trump person, maybe when she was in the moment, she was like, well, of course I'm consenting because it's Donald effing Trump. But then after,
who knows what went on in her head.
Exactly. But then after it happened, then she maybe have had a change of her opinion. Yeah. And that's, you can have that. I'm not going to say you can't, but then the tricky thing is, when do you consider it one thing versus another? Did she ask to stop? Like all of these different things are boiling down, in my head at least, to consent.
Well,
and knowledgeable consent.
Yeah, right. Okay, so the problem is consent is I don't know what that means, right? I don't even know what it means, because we grew up like in the United States, we talk about consent as though it's like, well, it means yes. You say yes to, when the person says yes, they want to do this, that's consent. It's like, but why is it that they're saying yes? Where'd that come from? Like, imagine where the yes comes from, so even that is just deeply disturbing and problematic for me, sociologically, right? So that's a social construction. So, okay, so this person said yes because he or she has friends around who have also said yes. And so therefore, it's like, okay, I'll say yes too, because I feel pressured by the socialization of my friendship networks to say yes. But what if she didn't have any friends around, or he, and they would say no? And so even that is just like, it's crazy. So, okay,
anyway,
anything else? Because I'm like, I want my foreskin back. We could, hey, that could be that could be the name of a song out there. I want my foreskin back.
That could be the name of this podcast.
It could be. We could, this could be it. Hey, what time? How long have we been on, by the way?
It is 3:00, and we have been on for an hour and 45 minutes.
All right, man. I think we got to cut this. So thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We'll come back on at some point. We're going to do it in a couple weeks. We're going to try out a different method of this. Maybe next week we'll do it. All right. Thanks.
I think next time we need to not talk about sexual allegations. Just because it's such a tricky
Well, no, I know,
issue.
but I think
and
but I think we did a nice job with that. I think it's
I
really,
think so too.
It's immensely complex.
It is.
Yeah. Okay.
Golden rule.
Thanks.
Treat
Do unto
others like
others.
treat others like you'd like to be treated.
Yeah, and don't worry about what others say you should be doing. Just do what feels. Yeah. All right, here we go. I'm out. Take care.
Peace, everybody.
Thanks.